We were pulled from the same inferno, Meng Yuanqi and I. But only she emerged transformed. Overnight, her brilliance ignited like wildfire. Her words, sharp, revolutionary, became scripture for the masses. Even my crown prince fiancé publicly cast me aside to pursue her. In this world, she declared, her voice dripping with destiny, I am heaven's chosen. Victory is mine alone. I met her gaze, a ghost of my past life flickering in my eyes. Start over? My laugh was cold, sharp. You'd still be nothing but smoke. Welcome to my channel. If you like this story, please click to subscribe. There are more wonderful stories waiting for you to listen to. Chapter 1. Meng Yuanqi and I were rescued from a fire at the Guyuan Temple. After several days of unconsciousness, we each regained consciousness. Over the next 6 months, her fame spread throughout the capital. I, however, remained silent and secluded for half a year. On the day of my coming-of-age ceremony, the crown prince personally came to my door and said he wished to annul our engagement. That day, thousands of kites soared into the sky, and guests filled the hall to celebrate my coming of age. He walked toward me in a robe of cloud-patterned brocade, his sleeves fluttering in the breeze, capturing everyone's attention. In front of everyone, he said to me, "We have been childhood sweethearts for over a decade. In my youth, I was naive and thought we could promise each other eternal love. But now I realize it was nothing more than sibling affection. This marriage shall be called off." Whispers filled the air, and people exchanged glances. What had been a grand coming-of-age ceremony turned into a mockery in an instant. My father was furious and shouted, "Are you mocking the Jiang family by doing this?" The crown prince showed a hint of regret, then bowed slightly and said, "Lord Jiang, I apologize. To make amends, I have already requested the emperor's permission to bestow the title of Zhaoyan princess on Yanru. From now on, I will treat her as my own sister and will never allow anyone to harm her." I stopped my impulsive older brother and walked step by step toward the crown prince. Unlike what everyone expected, I did not burst into tears or show any signs of grief. I did not utter a single word of blame, but spoke calmly. This marriage is easy to call off but hard to resume. If we call it off today, there will be no chance to regret it later. But he spoke firmly. No regrets. Hearing those 2 words, I felt at ease. In my memory, someone once knocked on the gates of the Jiang mansion in a downpour, their fine clothes soaked through, abandoning all their dignity and bearing, just to tell me he regretted it. I had someone pour wine, then raised my cup to him and smiled lightly. "Your Highness, after drinking this cup of wine, our engagement is dissolved, and our childhood friendship ends here. I wish you fulfillment of your ambitions and a good spouse by your side." He seemed surprised by my calm acceptance, but he still hurriedly drank the wine in his cup and said, "Thank you." Perhaps he was thanking me for not clinging to him, for letting him go. I put down the wine cup, met his astonished gaze, and said calmly, "Once upon a time, I was also a rebellious and unruly person, doing as I pleased. Later, you and I made an engagement. Everyone said I was the future princess consort, and if I failed, it would bring shame upon you. So I studied diligently for years, mastering music, chess, calligraphy, and painting, as well as the classics and court etiquette, all to be worthy of you, the crown prince. Today, I also thank you for allowing me to finally shed these shackles." As I finished speaking, everyone present couldn't help but sigh with a mix of emotions. Our engagement was arranged by the late empress before she passed away. I had borne this burden for years, unable to live freely. As he heard of all the efforts I had made for him, a complex expression flashed across his eyes, tinged with a hint of guilt. His departing figure appeared somewhat hasty, no longer the composed and resolute man he had been upon arrival. My elder brother asked the crown prince why he had been so resolute. I whispered, "It's probably because of Meng Yuanxi. He had made our absurd relationship public knowledge, using this public annulment to declare his sincere devotion to Meng Yuanxi. After Meng Yuanxi regained consciousness, she disguised herself as a man to participate in the imperial examinations, causing a great stir. In the end, the crown prince intervened on her behalf, sparing her from punishment. The emperor posed a question to test her, but she composed a poem in 7 steps, speaking eloquently, and presented it as advice on governance, offering insights on 4 aspects: governing officials, ensuring the people's well-being, enriching the nation, and military affairs. Her essay was profound and enlightening, capturing the attention of the court and the country. The emperor, recognizing her talent, granted her a special pardon. For a time, she was the talk of the capital. She became a legendary woman in everyone's eyes. Even the crown prince himself was captivated by her. Many tales of their romance circulated among the people. After I was rescued, during the 6 months I spent in seclusion, the crown prince visited me several times. But every time, he mentioned that man he had met in the countryside, Mr. Meng. The admiration in his eyes was almost overflowing, and the more he spoke of that man, the fewer times he visited me. In his descriptions, this Meng brother was highly talented, with a deep and complex mind. The carefree and unconventional nature he possessed was precisely what the crown prince, as a member of the royal family, had always longed for but could never attain. This person understood his thoughts, and he regarded him as a true confidant. At first, he was full of praise, but gradually, he began to change. His brows were often furrowed with a hint of sorrow, and when facing me, he always seemed to have something on his mind but couldn't bring himself to say it. I suppose that was when he discovered that the man he had considered his soulmate was actually a woman who had captured his heart. The rumors about them had already reached my ears. It was said that the crown prince rode horses with her in the southern mountains and taught her to shoot arrows at geese. He searched through every book in the palace library just to find a rare volume she had mentioned offhand. My brother asked me in confusion, "Why can you accept the prince's change of heart so calmly? Why can you agree to call off the engagement so easily? You clearly loved him so much." Because I had once been obsessed and had forced myself on him. But his heart had already changed. What else could I have left besides my own humiliation? Since I knew the outcome, it was better to let go gracefully and preserve the last shred of dignity. It's me who doesn't want him anymore. Hearing my words, my brother's eyes were filled with shock. He couldn't understand why I had changed. My marriage to him was arranged by the late empress before she passed away. The Jiang family had flourished for 100 years. And by my grandfather's generation, 3 generations had served as prime ministers. The late empress wanted the Jiang family to become the prince's ally. Now, it was he who had abandoned this ally. The emperor was furious over the prince's insistence on breaking off the engagement and summoned my father to calm him down. After breaking off the engagement, he hurriedly submitted a petition requesting that Meng Yuanxi be named the crown princess of the Eastern Palace. In the end, the emperor agreed to allow both the main and secondary princesses to enter the palace, with the secondary princess hailing from the prestigious Yang family. My father and brothers feared I would be upset and suggested I stay at the outer courtyard for a while. But I refused. The real drama in the capital has just begun. How could I leave now? When I met Meng Yuanxi, her eyes were filled with pity, a pity tinged with an inexplicable sense of superiority. Her gaze always carried a hint of contempt. "Miss Jiang, you noble ladies are as stiff and proper as puppets on strings. Dull and old-fashioned. That's why the crown prince grew tired of you, isn't it?" As she spoke, she shook her head, seeming to despise such propriety. If that wasn't a stab to the heart, I don't know what was. I looked at her contemptuous gaze and smiled. You can't compare to Miss Meng, who is so carefree and unconstrained, treating the world's rules as if they didn't exist. Hearing me say this, she seemed to enjoy it, her tone filled with pride and arrogance. Yes. The prince said he longs for a life of freedom and spontaneity, and hopes to be someone who acts according to his heart. But you can't give him that. I hear that the crown prince has already requested permission, and soon the two concubines will enter the palace together. This is truly cause for celebration. Yen Ru has already prepared generous gifts. As I finished speaking, her expression changed slightly, and she said firmly, the crown prince's heart cannot accommodate so many people. The man I marry must be mine alone for the rest of my life. Her words were enough to shock any other woman in the world. But I was not surprised. I said with a touch of regret, that's truly a pity. As the crown prince, he may end up disappointing your expectations. She raised her eyebrows slightly, as if provoked by a desire to win, and sneered, what you can't do, I'll do just to show you. A few days later, the imperial decree granting the marriage was bestowed upon the Meng family, and the crown prince personally delivered it to show his importance. But no one expected Meng Yuanxi to immediately declare that she would spend her entire life with the crown prince. And if that was not possible, she would rather remain unmarried for the rest of her life. Her words caused everyone to look at her in astonishment, and the entire court was shocked. The crown prince was caught between a rock and a hard place. Meng Yuanxi's boldness stemmed from her reliance on the crown prince's affection for her. Every word she spoke emphasized the unique bond between them, leaving no room for anyone else. The crown prince had never encountered such a bold and unrestrained woman, nor had he ever seen such unwavering determination for the one he loved. His eyes filled with tears as he declared that he understood the depth of her feelings and would never betray her. Finally, he took her hand and knelt with her outside the Suiyu palace, pleading with the emperor to revoke the decree allowing the concubine to enter the palace. He was willing to take full responsibility for all the charges. And if the emperor refused, he would remain kneeling forever. They knelt there for an entire day, and the emperor was so enraged that he shattered more than a dozen teacups. The late empress was the emperor's wife from their youth, having accompanied him through the hardships of exile in Ba Shu. They shared a bond unlike that of ordinary people. The crown prince was the child he had raised with his own hands, and toward him, he had the tender affection of an ordinary father. In the end, the emperor relented. As the night grew dark, he granted the crown prince's request. Meng Yuanxi finally married into the Eastern Palace, becoming the sole mistress of the Eastern Palace. At first, the women of the capital thought she was mad, but now they all envied her. To have a crown prince love her so deeply that he left the harem empty. Everything that women in the world dared not even dream of, she had obtained. When she appeared before me again, she was dressed in fine silk, her face radiant with joy, and the maidservant behind her held a box. These are the items you sent to Jianan over the years. They are no longer suitable to remain in the Eastern Palace. Jianan said to bring them back to you. Yi Jianan was the prince's given name. She deliberately referred to him by his given name to emphasize her closeness to him, and to rub it in my face. I glanced through the box, which contained books, brushes, and tassels. Every year on his birthday, I would send him a small gift, all carefully selected. I never imagined there would be so many accumulated over the years. I had the maid take it, then smiled lightly. Thank you for taking the trouble to return it personally, princess. Alas, the summer fireflies the crown prince once caught for me, the fireworks he set off for me, they can never be returned. A flash of displeasure crossed her eyes, but she quickly concealed it and said deliberately, the crown prince regards you as his own sister. I will treat you the same in the future. Then I shall be grateful. I appeared too nonchalant, causing her to furrow her brows. as if she had lost some sense of accomplishment and joy. Jiang Yanru, your composure makes me feel like I won too easily. Losing the challenge. Are ancient women like this, submissive and timid? So ignorant and lacking in initiative and courage? Truly laughable. Her brows furrowed deeply, and her eyes betrayed her contempt. Her reaction was exactly what I had expected. She looked down on me. Or rather, she looked down on the entire group of ancient women she had mentioned. Challenge? So, the crown prince is just your trophy, isn't he? I sat on the swing, lifting my gaze to meet hers. She snorted derisively, unconcerned, and said, yes. To you he is your childhood sweetheart and fiancé. But to me he is merely a trophy worth flaunting. His deep affection and power, his love and pampering, are things I am destined to obtain in this world. In this world, I am the inevitable winner. The first time I heard these words, I didn't understand where her arrogance and sense of superiority came from. I also didn't understand why she always looked down on everyone else with such a haughty gaze. But now, I have heard these words for the second time, and I have come to understand why she always says these things in front of me, and why she refuses to let me go. Because those things were taken from me by her own hands. With each thing she takes, she grows more arrogant. Until she has taken everything, she can then stand above me and say, women of the ancient world are nothing but foolish and useless. She left triumphantly, and the maid, feeling resentful, whispered, she took everything that should have belonged to the young miss. Yet she dares to act so brazenly? I handed the pastry to the young maid and comforted her. What can be taken away is not mine to begin with, I don't care about it. That day, I deliberately brought up the matter of the concubine and the secondary wife entering the mansion at the same time, just to provoke her. But she was too eager to show the world her success and prove her uniqueness to all women. So she couldn't wait to use such an extreme method to obtain this one-of-a-kind thing. Now that the situation has turned out this way, she is satisfied. And I am also very satisfied. Watching Meng Yuanxi's departing figure, I smiled slightly, my fingertips gently caressing the branches and leaves of the tree. Speaking casually, I have been reborn and returned. If you have made no progress, this game of chess will become rather boring. Although Meng Yuanxi has become the crown princess, the emperor clearly does not favor her. Though he once regretted her talent, her subsequent actions have eroded most of that goodwill. However, the crown prince was utterly captivated by her sharp wit and unrestrained demeanor. Perhaps that was what he longed for but could never achieve. He hoped to see that freedom and spontaneity embodied in Meng Yuanxi. My brother despised Meng Yuanxi to the extreme and could not stand seeing her constantly seeking to provoke me. Coincidentally, it was the 15th day of the month, so I pleaded with my brother to accompany me to the temple to burn incense, claiming it was because I was still frightened from narrowly escaping death last time. He agreed and hurried to make preparations. However, this time, I selected the people to accompany me, including a couple of maids, my wet nurse, and several elderly maids. My brother chose some capable guards to accompany us. After arriving at Baogua Temple to burn incense, my brother was eager to return home, but I insisted on dragging him around to look around. Suddenly, there was a commotion in the crowd, with people shouting that a woman seemed to be in labor. The crowd panicked and hurriedly took her to the back courtyard. I told my brother to stay put and led a few elderly women toward the back courtyard. My brother said I was unmarried and shouldn't be in such a place, but I replied that it was a matter of life and death, and the elderly women were experienced. If there was an emergency, they could be of use. He couldn't persuade me, so he reluctantly agreed. The backyard was already in complete chaos. The woman's cries of pain grew more urgent, and the maids attending her were panicking and at a loss. I walked over to them and said in a firm voice, "The old women by my side have experience helping with childbirth. If you trust them, why not let them try? Those people looked as though they had found a savior. But they still dared not act on their own. In the end, it was the woman herself who nodded in agreement. The midwives entered the room, and I sat outside waiting quietly. However, the maids were pacing back and forth anxiously. Finally, the baby's cries rang out, and mother and child were safe. Everyone sighed in relief. The maids rushed forward anxiously, while the attendants hurried back to report the good news. I left quietly with a few midwives. As soon as we stepped out of the backyard, we saw Meng Yuanxi and his entourage rushing over. When she heard that the woman in the back courtyard had given birth safely, her expression changed drastically. Her eyes were filled with confusion and disbelief. On previous occasions, she had always looked at me with a smug sense of superiority. But today, her composed facade cracked for the first time. This is impossible. Her eyes flickered with fear and apprehension for the first time. As I brushed past her, I murmured, "Do you think you're the only one who knows the future?" The words faded away with the wind. She turned her head to stare at me, as if trying to confirm whether those words had truly been spoken. But I didn't stop. Instead, I walked away slowly, leaving her to be consumed by doubt and torment. The next day, I heard from the maid that an important guest had arrived at the mansion and insisted on seeing me. When I entered the main hall, I saw the general of the state standing before me, bowing respectfully. "Thank you, Miss Jiang, for saving my wife's life yesterday. If it weren't for you instructing your maid to come to her aid, the consequences would have been unimaginable. This kindness is something I will never forget." This display startled even my father and older brother. Everyone knew that the general and my father had always been at odds, glaring at each other whenever they met. Today, he had come personally, and my father was still wondering why he had come. But upon seeing him, he bowed deeply, leaving my father speechless. Forcing a polite smile, I bowed in return and said, "General, you are too kind. Seeing that the lady and the young master are safe, I am relieved." The general of the Imperial Guard pulled my father aside for a lengthy chat, as if there had never been any animosity between them, but rather they were old friends. He even said that once his youngest son was a month old, he would bring his entire family to pay a personal visit to express their gratitude. Resolving hostility into harmony with the general of the state was a fortunate outcome for both the Jiang family and the court. And my father was pleased to see it. Only my older brother furrowed his brows and asked cautiously, "Sister, why do I feel that all of this was within your expectations?" I retorted, "Am I a god or something? Can I predict the future?" He scratched his head, sensing something was off, but he couldn't put his finger on it. So he fell silent. The general's wife had given birth prematurely, and even the maids attending her hadn't expected it. Who could have known? I found out beforehand. As for Meng Yuanxi, it could only be said that other matters were within her expectations. But my unexpected arrival was not something she had anticipated. In a previous life, the crown prince was deposed and then reinstated because he had the support of the general of the Imperial Guard. But in this life, Meng Yuanxi had arrived too late. When the general of the Imperial Guard's mansion held a grand banquet to celebrate the baby's first month, they invited me with great enthusiasm and even had me sit at the main table. The general's wife held my hand and praised me endlessly. Meanwhile, Meng Yuanxi was ignored. Everyone knew it was because of her interference that the crown prince had broken off the engagement. Under such circumstances, the general's wife merely paid her a token bow before turning her attention elsewhere. The handkerchief in her hand was clenched so tightly it had lost its shape. Since she had been rescued from the fire, she had never been treated so coldly. In the past, she had been just an ordinary young lady among the aristocratic women of the capital, unknown and unremarkable. Over the years, she had transformed herself, stunning everyone, and had since become a prominent figure in the capital. It was rare for her to be treated so coldly. I met the crown prince by the pond, and there was a hint of guilt in his eyes. He said, "Yenru, I hope you will find a better match and let go of your obsession. Do not let me ruin the rest of your life." Did he think I was still thinking about him? I shook my head and smiled lightly, feeling a bit ironic. In my previous life, I had indeed been obsessed with him for a long time, falling seriously ill because of it. Yet he paid no attention to me, never once asking about my well-being, instead immersing himself in the tender embrace of Meng Yuanxi. Now, there was no room for him in my heart or mind, yet he spoke such caring words. I ignored him and turned to leave, only to see Meng Yuanxi watching us from afar, his aura emanating a chill. After the full moon banquet, the crown prince was sent to the coastal region to investigate a case of illegal salt trafficking. However, just over a month after his departure, news arrived that the crown princess was gravely ill. In my previous life, Meng Yuanxi had indeed been seriously ill for a while, but that was 2 years before this incident. At that time, it was because the crown prince had grown indifferent toward her and wanted to take a concubine. So she took a medicine to feign illness. The crown prince, seeing her on the brink of death, recalled the days when he was first struck by her beauty and later fell deeply in love with her. She took advantage of the time he spent with her to recreate those beautiful memories and made the heartfelt promise. "I will follow you to the ends of the earth, in life and in death." Eventually, the crown prince's feelings for her returned, and she gradually recovered. But now, she seems to sense a threat and has accelerated her plans. Upon hearing of her illness, the crown prince, disregarding the major salt smuggling case, entrusted the matter to his ministers and hurried back to the capital. However, the imperial physicians were helpless, and it was ultimately a wandering miracle doctor who entered the palace to treat her. The miracle doctor stated that if he could obtain a rare ingredient as a medicinal catalyst, he could cure her. This ingredient was called snow magnolia lotus, even rarer than the ice mountain snow lotus. Only this ingredient could save her life. But even the imperial treasury did not possess such a precious item. The divine physician then added that if a single drop of heart blood from someone who had previously consumed this substance were added to the medicine, it would have the same effect. When this news spread, the eyes of the entire capital turned toward the Jiang family. I had taken this medicine when I was ill as a child. It was clear that Meng Yuanxi was targeting me. The so-called divine physician from the martial arts world was likely someone colluding with her. My brother said that if anyone from the Eastern Palace dared to come, he would break their legs. But what was meant to happen eventually did. The crown prince came personally, and my brother's stick almost fell from his hands. But fortunately, my father stopped him in time. The crown prince looked haggard, with reddened eyes. He bowed toward me and spoke in a hoarse voice. "Yenru, Yuanxi is on her deathbed. Please save her. She is on her deathbed." What does that have to do with me? I raised my eyebrows and asked him in return. He was clearly taken aback, standing frozen in place. After a moment, he said, "I know you are upset about the annulment of our engagement, but all the mistakes were mine. Do not take it out on her. All it would take is a single drop of your heart's blood to save her life. What difficulty could that possibly pose for you?" The crown prince speaks so lightly. It's as if the knife isn't cutting into your own flesh. My tone carried a hint of mockery. He looked utterly stunned. "When did you become so cold-hearted?" Looking at him, who was completely in the dark and acting like a fool, I found it utterly ridiculous. His loss of composure only piqued my curiosity about Meng Yuanxi's schemes. I tapped my sleeves. "Then I'll accompany you. Let's go and see what's happening." My brother looked anxious, but he couldn't persuade me, so he selected some guards skilled in martial arts to accompany me. Actually, there was no need for that. Upon entering the Eastern Palace, I saw Meng Yuanxi lying on the bed, barely clinging to life. The room was filled with the smell of medicine. I must admit, the medicine that the legendary doctor had given her was indeed magical. She looked so ill and dying that it was easy to believe her condition was terminal. If I hadn't known the truth, I would have thought she was about to die. I dismissed everyone else, leaving only the two of us in the room. She coughed intermittently, her voice rising and falling. Now that it's just the two of us, there's no need to pretend anymore. Is there? I sat down leisurely, running my fingers over the nail polish on my nails. Her gaze grew cold as she stared at me intently, her eyes filled with scrutiny and suspicion. What do you mean? You feigned illness and set this trap, wasn't it all for me? Using heart blood as medicine. How ridiculous. I raised my eyes to meet hers. All her pretense was suddenly exposed, and a hint of panic flashed in her eyes. But moments later, she regained her composure and laughed arrogantly. But you came here for the crown prince, didn't you? Your beloved ordered you to take your heart's blood for another woman's medicine. That must feel like your heart is being torn apart, right? I slowly stood up and walked to her bedside, reaching out to grip her jaw, applying a little pressure. I looked down at her from above and smiled lightly. You really think highly of him. Her eyes flashed with shock and fear. Since you want me to take the credit for saving someone and being a compassionate savior, I'll grant you your wish. Now that I've come to the Eastern Palace, the crown princess should recover soon, right? If she doesn't, it will be time for everyone to see the crown princess's true colors. I spoke slowly. She understood the threat in my words, and a flash of resentment crossed her eyes. All her scheming had been for nothing, and she looked like a clown. I slowly let go of her hand and turned to leave the room. The crown prince was waiting anxiously in the courtyard. Seeing his anxious expression, I casually said, "The crown princess will recover soon." He was confused, while I returned home safely. My brother couldn't understand why I had managed to escape unscathed and still become the crown prince's savior. The crown princess's condition improved, and she gradually recovered. Gifts from the palace poured into the Jiang mansion, but I didn't glance at any of them. It could only be said that Meng Yuanxi had bitten off more than she could chew this time and had no choice but to admit that I had saved her. In both instances, I had acted first, and after she recovered, she seemed to lose her composure. Due to her previous actions and the fact that the crown prince had abandoned an important case to rush back to the capital, the emperor grew increasingly displeased with her and began to show signs of disappointment toward the crown prince as well. Desperate to regain her status, she began to act more boldly and take risks. She predicted that the southwestern barbarian tribes would stir up trouble, and a few months later, a rebellion broke out in the southwest. The emperor planned to go hunting at the imperial hunting ground before autumn, but she insisted that the trip was unlucky and strongly advised against it. And during the hunting trip, a landslide occurred, with rocks and mud rolling down the mountain. The following year, during the rainy season, she claimed that the dikes in Jiangnan would break. To everyone's surprise, every single one of her predictions came true, and soon, people across the realm began to speak of her as a marvel. People from all the provinces rushed to seek an audience with the crown princess, begging her to foretell the future and predict fortune and misfortune. I sat in a tea house, sipping tea leisurely, listening to the storyteller below banging his wooden clapper and recounting the legendary tale of the crown princess. Those who heard it were all stunned. They all marveled that she was a divine maiden descended from heaven, capable of foretelling the future, and their faces were filled with reverence. I placed a silver ingot on the table and quietly left amidst the cheers. Meng Yuanxi, in this life, you were simply too impatient. At a time when the Eastern Palace was bustling with guests, Su Fu, the nation's foremost fortune-teller, emerged from seclusion to pay his respects to the emperor. He declared that the stars portended disaster, that a demoness had descended to the mortal realm, and that she would bring chaos to the land, angering the heavens and inviting divine retribution. If this continued, the dynasty would be unstable, and the empire would face collapse. These words pointed directly at the Eastern Palace. Rumors spread like wildfire in the streets. Storytellers began with the fire at the Guanyuan Temple, detailing the drastic changes in Meng Yuanxi's personality before and after her rescue, as if she were a different person. They also mentioned the strategies she had devised, which demonstrated her profound understanding of the world, something unimaginable for a woman who had never left the palace. Moreover, she had previously been an ordinary young lady in the capital, with no reputation for talent. Yet overnight, she had become a prodigy of extraordinary talent, which was highly unusual. She then engaged in a series of unusual actions, such as dressing as a man to take the imperial examinations, seducing the crown prince to leave his harem empty for her, and even predicting the future and foretelling the fortune and misfortune of the world. Since meeting Meng Yuanxi, the crown prince has also lost his former virtue, becoming obsessed with her beauty, neglecting his duties, and disregarding the ancestral rules and laws. All these unusual occurrences are signs of demonic influence, and even the children's rhymes on the streets sing, "When the demoness appears, disasters follow, and the kingdom falls into chaos." Recalling the fortune-teller's words, the common folk began to say that it was not Meng Yuanxi who could predict disasters, but that she was a demoness who had seduced the crown prince, bringing down heavenly punishment and disaster upon the land. I merely gave her a little push, and in just over a month, she had transformed from a goddess in the eyes of the people into a demoness bringing disaster. The Yang clan seized the opportunity to petition the emperor, demanding the execution of the demoness to restore peace to the realm. Many in the streets echoed their calls, submitting petitions signed by thousands. The emperor issued an edict, ordering Meng Yuanxi's immediate arrest. The events unfolded suddenly, yet she remained lost in her old dreams. She could not fathom how she had gone from being a goddess adored by all to a demoness, a prisoner condemned by the masses. My brother and I stood on the upper floor of a tea house. My brother couldn't help but sigh. Once she was showered with honor and glory, but now she's surrounded by enemies. Everyone wants to kill her. I raised my eyes and smiled. Isn't this the inevitable outcome? She never cared about the ways of the aristocratic family. The bitter fruit she reaps today was foretold long ago. The crown prince defied the emperor's will for her, and though all the women in the capital envied her deep love and favor, she eventually became the target of everyone's hatred. The emperor disliked her. The court officials criticized her with words and pens, and the Yang clan harbored resentment. Meng Yuanxi had essentially pushed herself into the spotlight, and now that the wall had fallen, everyone was pushing her down. As for whether she is a divine maiden or a demoness, who truly cares? Her brother nodded and sighed deeply. In this life, Meng Yuanxi lost faster than I imagined. Many things turned out completely different from her expectations. And my actions, which were bold and unconventional, only served to throw her off balance. This time, it was thanks to you that you managed to persuade Sue to come out of retirement. Otherwise, things wouldn't have been so easy. Hearing this, my brother lowered his eyes and said, "Though I did go to invite him, his decision to come out of seclusion is not my doing." "What do you mean?" My brother sighed, then stood with his hands behind his back, gazing into the distance, and said in a solemn voice, "Su Fu came out of seclusion because the celestial charts truly show an anomaly. The political situation in the court is about to undergo a major change. In this life, many things have taken a different course from the previous one. Calculating the timing, perhaps some changes have reached their due moment. The shift in the political landscape must center on the Eastern Palace. In the previous life, the crown prince endured 2 ascensions and 2 depositions. Now, where does he go from here?" Meng Yuanxi was imprisoned, Yet the crown prince refused to abandon her, kneeling outside the Suayu palace for days on end to plead for her release. However, his stubbornness, in the emperor's eyes, was nothing more than being seduced by a woman, losing his mind, and being unfit for the throne. This time, the emperor let him kneel without mercy. But the crown prince dared to collude with his supporters and submit a joint petition, enraging the emperor so much that he threw the petition at his head. Everyone thought the emperor was merely acting on impulse. But that night, the imperial edict was issued. No one expected the edict to depose the crown prince to come so suddenly. The imperial decree stated that he had disobeyed his sovereign, formed factions for personal gain, indulged in women, and was unfit for the throne. The crown prince had relied on the emperor's affection for the late empress to secure his position as heir apparent for years. However, his repeated acts of disobedience had gradually disappointed the emperor. He then colluded with his supporters to plead for mercy for Meng Yuanxi, using the pretext of submitting a petition but in reality threatening the emperor, thereby forming a faction and committing treason, a grave offense against the emperor. As for Meng Yuanxi, now that the crown prince is no longer the heir apparent, she is no longer the crown princess. The emperor's decree is to execute her. But she doesn't care about what will happen to the crown prince. She is crying out in prison, begging to see me one last time. In her previous life, she made the same plea before being given poison wine. Perhaps I should go see her one last time. Her hands clutched the bars, her composure gone, her face twisted in anger. She shouted, "You said that day that you weren't the only one who knew the future. Were you the one who betrayed me behind my back?" I whispered, "Didn't you ever think that you were reaping what you had sown? The crown prince has been deposed. There is no one left who can save you." Upon hearing the news, she collapsed to the ground, her eyes filled with despair. How could this be? I came here through a book, knowing the fate of every character in it. The world was in my hands. I refused to live a life of obscurity and mediocrity. So I stole your destiny to rewrite the ending with my own hands. Everything was exactly as I had planned at first. But why did it all change? She seemed unable to accept this outcome. She had always been arrogant, believing herself to be wise and superior to others. Yet now she was a prisoner, her life hanging by a thread. She had forgotten that from the moment she refused to accept her fate in the book and stole someone else's destiny, everything had already begun to change. From the very beginning, you looked down on the people and things here, standing high above them with contempt. But you forgot that you weren't just fighting one person. This place is full of talented individuals and has its own rules and regulations. You relied on the things you stole to parade around arrogantly, blinded by your own pride. Eventually, you were bound to fail. As I finished speaking, she laughed wildly, her eyes filled with resentment and obsession. After a moment, she began speaking on her own. Do you know? This is a world from a book. Originally, you were supposed to marry Yi Jianan according to our childhood engagement, live a life of marital bliss, and after 5 years, he would ascend the throne as emperor, and you would become his empress. You were the female lead in the book, while I went to great lengths to use Yi Jianan as a stepping stone to climb higher. Yet in the end, I couldn't overcome the predetermined fate of the book. These words were spoken to me by her in her previous life as she lay dying. Now, she was merely repeating them once more. It was her own ambition that drove her to this. No one forced her to fight or compete. Yet now she blames fate. In my previous life, I also became an empress, though not Yi Jianan's, due to Meng Yuanxi's relentless pressure and a series of coincidences. I ended up marrying someone else. That man eventually became emperor, and we spent decades together, weathering storms and becoming the best of allies. Yi Jianan's position as crown prince was twice established and twice revoked. He eventually rebelled and died in a hail of arrows. while Meng Yuanxi was poisoned to death. She did indeed change the fate of everyone in the book with her own hands. 15 years after her death, I passed away in the Phoenix Palace. However, due to an unresolved obsession in my heart, I was reborn at the age of 15, which was the year Meng Yuanxi first entered the book. But there was no point in telling her any of this. For her, this was the only life she knew. But for me, it was 2 lives. In the previous life, she stole others' fortune, entered the plot with her own life, and altered the course of the book. Everyone's fate differed from the original story. I did not wish to compete with her, but she pressed me relentlessly. My existence only made her restless at night, leaving her with no room to retreat. I had no choice but to confront her. Though I ultimately defeated her, it was no easy victory. In this life, I have been reborn with the memories of my previous life, while she has come from the book, still determined to change the book's ending. However, she did not expect that in this life. Everything is different from both the book and my previous life. As I turned to leave, someone unexpectedly caught my eye at the corner. Seeing him there, I realized that although the crown prince's title had been stripped, the power behind him had not vanished overnight. Looking at Yi Jiannen's reddened eyes and cold gaze, I could tell he had been standing there for a long time, hearing everything that should and should not have been said. He still harbored genuine feelings for her, but she had called him nothing more than a tool for climbing the social ladder. Those words stripped away all her pretenses. In other words, whoever sat on the throne of the crown prince was the very person Meng Yuanxi sought to target. He had come here tonight, perhaps still clinging to hope, perhaps still intending to save her. Unfortunately, he had stumbled upon this ugly truth himself. The person he had poured his heart into saw him as nothing more than a tool, and the deep affection he believed he had for her was nothing but her calculated scheme. From start to finish, he was nothing but a fool who had been deceived. Meng Yuanxi's so-called sincerity was nothing but a facade, devoid of any genuine feelings. Now that the truth had been revealed, it was not merely a matter of deception and betrayal for him, it had shattered his pride that he had built up over the years into pieces. The deep affection and protection he had shown her in front of the world had all become a laughingstock. I left on my own, leaving the matter between the two of them. The next day, I heard that Meng Yuanxi had died, strangled to death in prison. The eunuch who carried out the execution happened to be there when Yi Jianan arrived, and it was he who ultimately carried out the act. I was stunned for a long time. He could be so ruthless and decisive. Afterward, I realized he was using Meng Yuanxi's life to submit to the emperor, showing his loyalty and expressing his intention to return, hoping to win back the emperor's mercy. I wonder if the crown prince has any chance of being reinstated in this lifetime? The capital was eerily quiet. Although Yi Jianan had been stripped of his title, the emperor imposed no further punishment on him, and no one could discern the emperor's true intentions. One day, Yi Jianan knocked on the gates of the Jiang mansion and said he wished to see me. When I met him in the main hall, he seemed entirely different from before, his aura oppressive and tinged with a hint of malevolence. He asked me if I had ever truly loved him. I replied that I had once loved him, but that once was so long ago, separated by the span of past and present lives, that I could no longer recall the feelings of that time. He gripped my shoulders tightly and spoke to me with great emotion. Yenru, I regret it. If you are willing to give me another chance, in the future, I will make up for all the wrongs I have done to you 100-fold. In a previous life, he had come in the rain, knocked on the gates of the Jiang mansion at night, and said the same words to me. But my answer was the same as it had been back then. On that day, you said you had no regrets. You should understand that once a decision is made, it cannot be undone. I am by nature free-spirited and unrestrained. Yet after we made our marriage vows, I willingly allowed myself to be bound by conventions. But you turned around and fell in love with that vibrant, carefree woman. You never once chose me with certainty. How dare you expect me to come back to you? Today, I no longer wish to speak of what I learned, what I did, or what I gave up for him when I first fell in love. In my past life, I was obsessed and relentless. Yet all I received was his coldness and resolve. I returned and changed many things. But I refuse to alter the outcome of my relationship with the Crown Prince. Even if he does not withdraw from the marriage, I will do so myself. He looked at my resolute stance. His eyes reddened, veins visible. No longer the noble demeanor of a crown prince, nor the composure of the man who had coldly rejected me in marriage. At that moment, he wore a bitter smile on his lips and said, "One wrong step leads to many." He slowly stepped back and turned to leave. Days later, rebel forces entered the city. The imperial capital was besieged, and Yi Jianin rebelled, following the same path as in his previous life. The capital was in chaos, with rebel troops roaming everywhere, and families barricaded their doors, fearing disaster. Just as everyone believed the throne would change hands, news from the palace arrived. The third prince, Yi Jinyu, had led his troops to suppress the rebellion, earning credit for protecting the emperor, while the deposed crown prince, Yi Jianan, had been killed by arrows in the chaos. The rebellion was quelled so swiftly that it left the court officials in awe of this low-key third prince. However, his swift and composed actions seemed as though he had anticipated everything, as if he were catching a turtle in a jar. A bold thought flashed through my mind, but I dared not think further, until I saw him with my own eyes. He rode a majestic steed, clad in a black brocade robe adorned with cloud patterns. His eyebrows and eyes exuded an aura that was hard to look at, and his slightly arched eyebrows carried an air of decisiveness and ruthlessness. Such a fierce presence would not easily appear on a low-key and reserved prince, but rather on an emperor who had long occupied the throne. Looking into those familiar eyes, I finally confirmed that it was indeed him who had returned. My heart was in turmoil. He dismounted, softening his icy demeanor, and walked toward me slowly. His eyes were as deep as the sea, impossible to fathom, and he smiled lightly. "How have you been?" Meeting an old friend after so many years felt like a lifetime apart. In the moment our eyes met, it felt like we had crossed the span of past and present lives. I instinctively replied, "I am well." He smiled, his tone carrying a hint of complexity that was hard to discern. "That is good." Upon our reunion, we could only exchange these few words. No other words came to mind. In our past life, we were allies who weathered storms together, and I accompanied him to rule the world. In this life, we are strangers, exchanging only a few words. After the coup that deposed the crown prince, the old emperor's heart was filled with sorrow, and his illness grew worse. Eventually, no medicine could save him, and he passed away 6 months later. The third prince, Yi Jinyu, ascended the throne and changed the era name to Qingyan. A time of peace and prosperity was his vision. One day, the emperor went out incognito and visited the Jiang family. I was sitting by the railing feeding the fish in the pond when I saw him standing by the artificial mountain in a blue robe. I put down the bait, bowed, and said, "Greetings, Your Majesty." He walked over, brushing past the flowers and willows, and raised his hand to signal that I need not bow. Yi Jinyu did not speak, so I remained silent, continuing to feed the fish. The setting sun cast a gentle glow, and he sat quietly beside me for the entire afternoon. Though silent, the atmosphere was comfortable, as if we were old friends who didn't need words to accompany each other for a long time. As dusk began to fall, it was time for him to return to the palace. At that moment, he spoke softly. "My harem still needs a wise empress to manage the 6 palaces and govern the court. Are you willing?" When he asked this question, His gaze lingered on me, filled with hope, hoping for an answer. I shook my head and said firmly, "I refuse." The light in his eyes dimmed instantly, and a faint smile appeared on his lips. But his eyes betrayed a hint of resignation, as if this outcome had been expected. I spoke softly, "Your Majesty needs a wise empress. But there are no shortage of intelligent women among the aristocratic families. I am not the right choice. The Jiang clan has produced 3 prime ministers in 3 generations and flourished for a century. It would be better for the Jiang clan to remain loyal subjects rather than become an influential clan that could one day be feared and suspected. Only then can the emperor reign in peace, and the tale of a harmonious ruler and his ministers continue." The bitter smile on his lips did not fade, but he spoke softly, "You always have your reasons. If you refuse to enter the palace, what are your plans for the future?" A series of vivid scenes unfolded in my mind, filled with endless longing. I smiled and said, "I want to see the swirling snow in the desolate north, feel the fierce winds beyond the Yuhua Pass, sail on the west lake of Suzhou, and gallop across the vast grasslands." Upon hearing this, the furrowed brows on his forehead gradually relaxed, and he smiled with relief. "Then so be it." On the day I left the capital, someone came from the palace and hurriedly stopped my carriage. The man, with a long sword at his waist, bowed respectfully. "Miss Jiang, the emperor said that he cannot personally visit those beautiful lands, so he has sent you to see them on his behalf." I gazed at the imperial city, feeling melancholy for a long time, before finally agreeing, "All right." He then handed me a gold medal, saying respectfully, "The emperor said this gold medal is a gift for you. With this medal, you are as if the emperor himself is present. If you encounter any injustice, you may act on your own judgment. Please convey my gratitude to the emperor." I slowly took it, running my fingers over the patterns on the gold plaque, feeling a slight pang in my heart. As I was about to lower the curtain, he spoke again. "The emperor also said." He paused for a moment before speaking in a solemn tone. "The emperor also said that if you ever grow tired of the outside world or grow weary of it, the gates of the imperial city will always be open for you. There is no need." I silently lowered the curtain, blocking my view, as the carriage slowly moved forward. My heart lies in the vast expanse of the world, not within the confines of these red walls. 13 Yi Jinyu's side story. On that day at the Long Street intersection, the moment our eyes met, we both knew the other had returned. On the day she left the capital, I stood atop the city walls, yet dared not descend to see her off personally. Even the words I wanted to say, I could only have someone else convey them, because I feared seeing her gaze, devoid of any lingering affection, feared hearing her firm refusal, and feared that if I saw her with my own eyes, I would never be able to let her go. That day, when I asked her if she was willing to enter the palace, I already knew the answer. Yet I still asked again, hoping against hope, and received the expected response. She refused. This imperial city was the place that bound her in her previous life. She had fought desperately to escape, yet she wasted half her life within its walls. Caught between imperial power and the Jiang clan, she was trapped in the harem, worn down by hardship, and died in despair. Before she died, she clutched my hand tightly and said, "I only wish for the Jiang clan to thrive. I voluntarily relinquish my title as empress. After my death, I do not wish to be buried in the imperial mausoleum. I only wish to be buried on South Mountain, where I can see the flowers bloom freely in spring and the snow fall freely in winter." I fulfilled her wish. The Jiang clan flourished as before, with capable ministers emerging one after another. The throne remained vacant for a lifetime, with no one else to take her place. If rebirth is due to unresolved grievances and obsessions before death, then she was unwilling to be bound by fate. confined to the palace, and spend her life in bondage, never able to live freely. Her obsession was to obtain a free body, to roam freely under the vast heavens. And my grievances and obsessions could never be reconciled. In my previous life, I defied her will and did not depose her as empress. In this life, I fulfill her wish and set her free. She should be a phoenix soaring freely, not confined within these 3 walls of red brick. From now on, the majestic imperial city is merely my shackle, no longer her prison. And